The woman in the basement was holding a flashlight in one hand and a crowbar in the other, and she hadn't moved in over a minute. The beam cut through the dark and landed on a steel door set into the concrete wall. A door that wasn't on any blueprint, wasn't mentioned in any inspection report, wasn't supposed to exist. Across the top, someone had welded letters into the metal a long time ago. The edges were rough, handmade, the kind of work you do with a torch in a garage at 2 in the morning when nobody's asking questions. The letters read, "For those who came with nothing." Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Not the kind of creak a house makes when it settles. The kind it makes when someone steps on it. The woman turned off the flashlight, stood in the dark, listened. The children were supposed to be asleep. Subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments. Have you ever walked into a place and known before anyone told you that it was keeping a secret? 4 months earlier, Maren Calloway was brushing a 6-year-old's teeth in the back of a Dodge Caravan, parked at the far end of a Walmart lot in Saginaw, Michigan. The boy's name was Huck. He was not her son. He sat on an overturned milk crate with his mouth open while she worked the toothbrush in small circles the way she'd been taught in nursing school. Not dental school, nursing school, because nobody teaches you how to raise 2 kids in a minivan. You just do whatever you remember from whatever training you got, for whatever job you used to have. "You're going too fast," Huck said, toothpaste running down his chin. "Hold still. It tickles. Everything tickles you. The seatbelt tickles you. Rain tickles you." Rain does tickle. In the front passenger seat, a girl sat with her knees pulled to her chest, drawing on the fogged-up window with her index finger. She was 8. Her name was Nola. She hadn't spoken a full sentence in the 4 months since Maren had taken her in through the emergency foster program. The caseworker said she used to talk fine. Then one day she just stopped the way a faucet shuts off, not slowly, not dripping, just done. Nola drew a house on the glass. Not a child's house, not a square with a triangle roof and a chimney puffing smoke. This one had 3 stories, a porch that wrapped around the front, and windows that went tall and narrow like a church. She drew it with the kind of detail that made you look twice. Then the glass fogged back over, and the house disappeared. Maren watched it vanish in the rearview mirror and didn't say anything. The Caravan smelled like old French fries and laundry detergent. Maren kept a gallon jug of water behind the driver's seat, a bag of clean clothes in the trunk, and a Ziploc with $340 in mixed bills under the floor mat. That was April. The money had to last until May. Dean had been dead 14 months, pancreatic cancer. 8 weeks from diagnosis to funeral. He was 49. They'd had a house in Flint, a 2-bedroom with a bad roof and a good yard, and she'd been a nurse at Hurley Medical Center for 11 years. Then the bills came. Not the regular kind, the kind that show up in envelopes so thick the mailman has to fold them. Maren sold the house, paid off most of the debt, kept the van, lost the job 3 months later. Not because she was bad at it, but because she'd missed too many shifts sitting in hospital waiting rooms on the other side of the desk. She didn't talk about it much. There wasn't anyone to talk to. The foster placements came through a woman named Gail at the county office who called one Tuesday afternoon and said there were 2 kids. Siblings needed a temporary home, maybe 3 weeks. That was October. By December, the 3 weeks had become permanent, and the apartment Maren was renting had become too expensive, and the landlord had become impatient, and the Dodge Caravan had become the only thing with her name on it that nobody could take away. Huck spit toothpaste into a paper cup. "Are we sleeping here again?" "Just tonight. You said that yesterday." "I know. And the day before." "Huck, I'm just counting." Maren wiped his chin with a napkin and tucked him into the sleeping bag on the back seat. He fell asleep in under a minute, the way kids do when their bodies are tired enough to override their brains. Nola stayed in the front seat, drawing a new house on the glass. Same house. 3 stories, wrap-around porch, tall windows. Every time the fog erased it, she started again. Maren stared at the ceiling of the van, a water stain on the fabric liner, looked like a map of somewhere she'd never been. She thought about calling Gail and telling her the truth that she couldn't do this, that the kids deserved a real bed and a door that locked and a refrigerator with more than ketchup packets in it. She thought about it every night. Every night she decided to call in the morning. Every morning she looked at Huck eating a gas station banana and Nola drawing houses that didn't exist and she couldn't pick up the phone. That's not bravery. That's just not knowing what else to do. The flyer was stapled to a telephone pole outside a Sunoco station on Route 13. Maren saw it while filling up $11.50 worth of gas, which was all she could justify. The paper was yellow, rain-warped, and the ink had bled at the edges, but the words were clear enough. County tax auction. Properties available. Starting bids from $500. Harlow, Michigan. April 19th. Below that, a list of addresses. Most of them were just lots empty squares of dirt that the county wanted off its books. But one line caught her eye because it was longer than the others, like whoever typed it had felt the need to explain. Lot 7, 414. Lakeshore Road, Victorian residence, 3 stories, 12 rooms, former residence of Dr. E. Velde, deceased structural condition, fair unpaid taxes since 2004. Minimum bid $1,500. She read it twice. Then she tore the flyer off the pole, folded it, and put it in the Ziploc with the money. Huck, watching from the back seat, said, "What's that?" "Maybe nothing. You're smiling." "I'm not smiling. Your mouth is doing the thing." Harlow, Michigan is the kind of town that shows up on maps only because somebody has to live between the places that matter. Population 900 and dropping. One traffic light that blinks yellow after 9 p.m. A main street with a hardware store, a diner, a post office, and 4 empty storefronts with brown paper taped over the windows. The nearest hospital is 40 minutes south. The nearest Walmart is an hour. Lake Superior sits at the north edge of town like a gray wall, and in April the wind comes off the water so cold it makes your eyes run. Maren drove up Lakeshore Road with both hands on the wheel because the road had frost heaves that could crack an axle. Huck pressed his face against the window. Nola drew on hers this time, just circles small and overlapping like she was thinking. The house appeared around a bend, sitting on a hill above the lake, and the first thing Maren noticed was that it was bigger than she'd expected. Not bigger in the way that makes you feel impressed. Bigger in the way that makes you feel tired. 3 stories of wood and stone, painted white, once now peeling down to gray. The porch sagged on the left side where a support beam had given up. Half the windows were boarded with plywood. The other half were just dark. The yard was waist-high dead grass and volunteer saplings growing through what used to be a walkway. A metal mailbox at the road still had a name stenciled on it, Velde, and underneath in smaller letters someone had scratched with a key or a nail. "Stay out." Huck said, "It's big." Nola said nothing, but she stopped drawing circles. She pressed her whole palm flat against the glass and stared. There was a woman standing at the property line next door. If you could call it next door because the nearest house was 200 yards away and looked almost as neglected. The woman was old. Not old like grandma old like she had been old for a long time and had gotten used to it. She wore a man's flannel jacket and rubber boots, and she was holding a garden hose that wasn't connected to anything. Just holding it like she'd walked outside with it and forgotten why. Maren raised a hand. The woman didn't wave back, didn't nod. Just watched with the kind of expression that says, "I already know what you're about to do, and I already know it's a mistake." The tax auction was held in the basement of the Harlow Municipal Building, which was also the library, which was also where they held AA meetings on Thursday nights. 12 people showed up. Maren was the only one who bid on Lot 7. The county clerk, a man with bifocals and a coffee stain on his tie, read the property description out loud and paused at the end. "You understand the condition of the property is as is. I understand. And you understand there's no warranty, no guarantee of habitability. And no, I understand." He looked at her the way the old woman had looked at her from the yard. Then he stamped the paperwork and handed it across the table. Congratulations. You now own the most unpopular house in the Upper Peninsula. Someone in the back row laughed. Maren didn't. She counted out $1,500 bills onto the counter money she'd been saving by eating one meal a day for 3 months. The clerk counted them twice, put them in a manila envelope, and wrote, Velde House sold on the outside. That night, Maren parked the caravan in the driveway of a house that now belonged to her. The word felt strange. Belonged. Like a shoe on the wrong foot. She sat in the driver's seat and looked at it through the windshield, the dark windows, the leaning porch, the dead grass, and tried to feel something. Joy, relief, anything. What she felt was the engine ticking as it cooled, and the weight of 2 sleeping children behind her, and the last of the daylight sliding off Lake Superior like water off a table. Huck murmured in his sleep, Did we stop counting? Yeah, buddy, we stopped counting. They moved in on a Tuesday. Moving in is a generous term for what actually happened, which was Maren carried 1 suitcase, 1 sleeping bag, 1 box of kitchen supplies, and 2 children through a front door that took 3 tries to open because the frame had swollen with moisture. The hallway smelled like wet plaster and something else, old paper. The kind of smell you find in a room where books have been left to rot. The floor was oak-scratched and dull but solid. The walls had wallpaper peeling in strips, revealing 2 previous layers underneath, like the house had been trying on different clothes for 50 years and hadn't decided. Huck walked through the front room and his footsteps echoed. It sounds empty. It is empty. No, it sounds empty, like the sounds are lonely. Nola stood in the doorway. She didn't step inside. She looked up at the staircase, wide wooden curving up into darkness, and then she looked at Maren. It was the kind of look that asked a question without words. Maren nodded. It's ours. Nola stepped in. That first night, they slept together in the front parlor because it was the only room Maren had time to clean. She'd swept the floor, checked for loose boards, and set up the sleeping bags near the fireplace, which she didn't light because she hadn't checked the chimney. And the last thing she needed was carbon monoxide poisoning on day 1. Huck fell asleep telling Nola about the lake. He'd never seen a lake that big. He'd named it Gerald. He said Gerald looked cold but probably had a good personality. Nola lay on her side and drew on the wall with a stub of brown crayon she'd had in her pocket. Small, careful lines, a doorway, then another doorway inside the first one, then a window above both. Maren watched her but didn't stop her. The wall was already ruined, and there was something in the way Nola drew, concentrated, precise, like she was copying something she could see that no one else could, that made Maren want to leave her alone with it. At 2 a.m., Maren got up and walked through the house with a flashlight. Not because she was scared, because she was a nurse and nurses check things. She checked the locks, 1 worked, 2 didn't. She checked the windows, most sealed, a few cracked. She checked the water. It ran brown for 30 seconds, then cleared, then ran brown again. She checked the stairs, solid except for the 3rd step from the top, which had a crack down the middle like a split lip. She was standing in the kitchen running the tap when she noticed the light on the electric panel was green. On. Active. She'd assumed there was no power. The county listing said utilities were disconnected. She hadn't called the electric company. She hadn't paid anyone. She opened the panel. The breaker was live. Everything was connected. In the kitchen drawer, the kind of drawer every old house has, full of rubber bands and dead batteries and takeout menus from restaurants that closed years ago, she found a stack of utility bills held together with a binder clip. Electric bills, 1 for every month going back 20 years. Every single one marked paid. The account holder wasn't Edmund Velde. It was listed as Beckford and Associates Attorneys at Law Marquette, Michigan. Maren stood in the kitchen at 2:15 in the morning, holding 20 years of someone else's electric bills, and felt something shift under her feet. Not physically. Something in the way the house made sense. Or stopped making sense. Because houses that sit empty for 2 decades don't keep their lights on. Someone does that for them. And people don't pay someone else's electric bill for 20 years out of habit. They do it because they're waiting for something. She put the bills back in the drawer and stood in the dark kitchen, listening to the hum of a refrigerator that had been running since before she arrived, powered by money she couldn't explain in a house that was supposed to be dead. Upstairs, Nola coughed in her sleep. The sound traveled through the empty house like a stone dropped in a well. The town found out fast. Towns that small don't need newspapers. They have Deborah at the post office who noticed the change of address form. They have Carl at the hardware store who saw Maren buy cork and a putty knife. They have the boys at the gas station who saw the Dodge Caravan with Saginaw plates parked on Lakeshore Road every day for a week. By the end of the first week, Maren had become the main topic at Rosie's Diner, which was the only place in Harlow where information moved faster than the internet. The story that circulated was simple and wrong the way small-town stories usually are. A homeless woman bought the murder house. She's got kids in there. She's either crazy or running from something. Nobody called it a murder house to her face. But she heard the word at the hardware store when she was buying nails, and the two men at the counter didn't realize she was standing behind the shelf of paint cans. Somebody finally bought the Velde place. Which one's that? The one where the doctor killed those people. He didn't kill anyone. 3 patients died. People die. He was a doctor. 3 in 1 year, though. Still, a pause. Well, good luck to her. Maren put the nails on the counter. Both men looked at their shoes. The plumber she called said he was booked through June. The roofer said he didn't work on that side of town. The woman at the grocery store served her last every time she came in, even when she was first in line. Nobody was cruel exactly. Nobody said go home. They just moved around her the way water moves around a rock without touching, without stopping, without acknowledging that the rock is there. Huck noticed. Kids notice everything. Why does the lady at the store always look at the wall when we come in? She's checking the prices. The prices are on the things, not on the wall. Huck. I'm just saying. Nola noticed too, but Nola didn't say. Nola drew. On the second day in the house, she'd found a box of old colored pencils in a closet. The expensive kind, thick and waxy, the kind an artist would use, and had started drawing on the walls of the upstairs hallway. Not scribbles, not kid art. She drew the view from the second-floor window. The lake, the sky, the line of birch trees at the edge of the yard with a precision that made Maren stop and stare. The colors were wrong. The lake was too green, the sky too orange. But the shapes were exact. Every branch, every wave, every shadow. Maren almost told her to stop. Then she looked at the wallpaper peeling stained 3 layers of ugly and thought she's improving it. Keep going, she said. Nola looked at her, a small surprised look. Then she turned back to the wall and kept drawing. The red paint was on a Thursday. Huck had been exploring the second floor, which Maren had told him not to do because Huck treated rules the way Squirrel Street bird feeders, as challenges to be overcome with enthusiasm. She heard him running down the stairs, fast stumbling. And when he came around the corner, his face was the kind of white that has nothing to do with skin color and everything to do with blood leaving a place it's supposed to be. There's blood on the wall. Maren went up. Second floor, third room on the left. A bedroom empty except for a metal bed frame with no mattress and curtains that had gone stiff with dust. On the wall opposite the window, in letters a foot high, someone had written, "He killed them." It wasn't blood. The drip marks were too even, the color too consistent. It was house paint, the same red as the old barn at the end of Lakeshore Road. Someone had come into this house with a brush and a can of barn paint and written those words and left. Could have been last year. Could have been 15 years ago. Red paint on plaster doesn't age the way you'd think. Maren stood in front of it for a long time. Huck stayed in the doorway, 1 foot in the room and 1 in the hall, like he hadn't decided which direction to run. "Is it true?" he asked. "No." "How do you know?" "Because writing something on a wall doesn't make it true. If it did, bathroom stalls would be history books." He almost laughed. Almost. She went downstairs, got a roller and a can of white Premier she'd bought at the hardware store, and covered the words in 3 coats. It took an hour. The red bled through the first two. By the third, it was gone. Or at least invisible, which in that moment felt like the same thing. That night, she sat on the porch in a lawn chair she'd found in the shed, wrapped in a blanket, and watched the lake go dark. The temperature dropped below freezing as the sun set. Her breath hung in the air. Inside, the children were asleep. Huck in his sleeping bag, Nola on a mattress Maren had bought for $40 at a thrift store in Marquette. The house behind her creaked and settled, and made all the sounds old houses make when they think nobody's listening. She was thinking about the electric bills, about the law firm that had been paying them, about the 3 patients who died, and the red letters on the wall, and the way the whole town looked at her, like she'd moved into a haunted house and didn't have the sense to know it. She was thinking about this when the sound came, not from inside the house, from next door, the scrape of boots on gravel, then a flashlight beam cutting through the dark, moving along the property line toward her porch. The old woman from the first day, the one with the rubber boots and the disconnected hose, stopped at the edge of Maren's yard. She was carrying something. A metal toolbox, heavy, battered, the kind mechanics use. She didn't say hello, didn't say good evening, didn't say I'm sorry for not waving the other day. She said, "Your kitchen faucet's been leaking since 1998. I can hear it from my bedroom. Either you fix it or I fix it, and I charge more than you can afford." Maren stared at her. "How do you know about the faucet?" "I know about every faucet, every pipe, every loose floorboard in that house. I know the third step from the top has a crack. I know the chimney damper sticks unless you hit it from the left side. I know the window in the back bedroom won't close all the way because the frame warped in the winter of '87, and Edmund said he'd fix it and never did." Edmund. Dr. Edmund Velde. A pause. The old woman set the toolbox down on the ground. "I was his nurse, 41 years. I know that house better than I know my own hands. And I know you've got 2 children sleeping in a building with a leaking faucet and a cracked step and a chimney that'll kill all 3 of you if you light a fire before it's swept." She picked the toolbox back up. "So, am I coming in or not?" Maren looked at the toolbox, looked at the woman, looked at the house behind her, dark and tall and full of things she didn't understand. "What's your name?" "Dorrit Voss." "Maren Calloway." "I know who you are. The whole town knows who you are. They think you are either crazy or running from something. I don't care which." She started walking toward the porch. "Show me the faucet." Dorrit fixed the faucet in 11 minutes. She didn't talk while she worked. She used a wrench that looked older than Maren and moved with the kind of efficiency that comes from doing the same job in the same house 100 times before. When she was done, she ran the water, listened, nodded once. Then she picked up the toolbox and walked to the front door. Maren followed her. "You said you were his nurse for 41 years. "I did. The people in town say he killed 3 patients." Dorrit stopped at the door. She didn't turn around. "People in town say a lot of things. Most of it isn't worth the air it takes to say it." She opened the door and stepped onto the porch. The cold hit them both. The lake was invisible now, just a black space where the stars stopped. "Did he?" Dorrit turned. In the porch light, the single bulb that still worked, powered by the electricity nobody could explain, her face looked like it had been carved from the same wood as the house. Liners everywhere. Deep ones. The kind you get from squinting into 40 winters of Lake Superior wind. Edmund Velde was the most stubborn, difficult, impossible man I ever worked for. He burned toast every morning. He argued with the radio. He wore the same brown sweater from September to April. And he never once admitted he was wrong about anything, not in 4 decades. She paused. "But he did not kill those people. And the day someone in this town has the decency to say that out loud, instead of whispering the opposite behind their curtains, will be a day I don't expect to live long enough to see." She picked up the toolbox, walked down the porch steps, stopped at the bottom. "The electric bills," she said without looking back. "You found them." "Yes." "Good. That means the lawyers are still paying attention. A beat. Fix that step before one of those kids falls through it. Hit the nail at an angle not straight down. The wood's too old for straight down. And she walked into the dark toward her own house, the toolbox knocking against her leg with every step, until the sound of her boots on the gravel faded, and there was nothing left but the wind of the lake and the hum of a refrigerator that had no business running, and the quiet breathing of two children upstairs, who had no idea not yet that the house they were sleeping in had been waiting for them longer than any of them had been alive. Maren went back inside, locked the door, the one lock that worked, walked upstairs, checked on Huck, asleep, mouth open, one arm hanging off the sleeping bag. Checked on Nola. The girl was asleep too. But on the wall beside her mattress in the dim light from the hallway, Maren could see a new drawing. Nola had done it in dark pencil, pressing hard enough to leave grooves in the plaster. It was a face. A man's face. Old, lined with deep-set eyes and a mouth that didn't smile but didn't frown either. Just a mouth that had said a lot of things and stopped. Maren didn't recognize him. She'd never seen a photograph of Edmund Velde. But Dorrit, if she'd been standing there, would have. The next morning, Maren stood in the upstairs hallway, looking at the face Nola had drawn on the wall. Deep-set eyes, a mouth that held its shape like someone used to keeping quiet. She tried to find photographs of Edmund Velde in the house the night before in drawers, closets, the roll-top desk in the study, and found nothing. Not a single frame, not a snapshot. Either the man hadn't believed in pictures or someone had removed them all. She went downstairs and made oatmeal on a camp stove she'd set up in the kitchen, because she didn't trust the gas range until someone who knew what they were doing could look at it. Huck ate 2 bowls and named the stove Francine. Nola ate half a bowl and stared out the window at the lake, her pencil already in her hand, working the edge of the table the way a smoker works a lighter, not using it, just holding it. Maren spent the morning trying to fix the cracked step. She'd bought a hammer and nails at the hardware store and had watched a video on her phone in the Walmart parking lot 2 weeks ago about stair repair. The video made it look simple. The video was a liar. She drove the first nail straight down the way you'd think you're supposed to. The wood split along the grain with a sound like a knuckle cracking, and the crack widened by an inch. She pulled the nail out, tried again, angling it this time the way Dorrit had told her. The nail went in crooked and poked through the side of the tread. She pulled that one out too. By the third try, her thumb was bleeding and the step looked worse than when she'd started. Huck sat at the bottom of the stairs, watching. Want me to get Francine? Francine is a camp stove. She's very supportive, though. Maren sat on the step above the broken one and pressed the hem of her shirt against her thumb. The blood was bright and thin, the kind of cut that stings more than it should. She looked at the step, at the nail holes she'd added to the crack at the hammer on the floor, and she laughed. Not because it was funny, because the alternative was to sit there and calculate how many things in this house were broken, and how few of them she knew how to fix. And if she started that math, she wouldn't stop. She spent the rest of the day on things she could do, swept every room on the first floor, scrubbed the kitchen counter with bleach until the stains faded from brown to yellow, pulled the boards off 2 windows in the front parlor, and the light that came in was so sudden and so white that Huck shielded his eyes and said the house was waking up. The plumbing fought her. The bathroom sink ran fine for 10 seconds and then made a sound like a cat caught in a wall and stopped completely. She took the P-trap apart with a crescent wrench. She knew that much from the apartment in Flint, and found it packed with calcium so thick it looked like bone. She scraped it out with a butter knife, reassembled the trap, and turned the water on. It leaked from 3 places she hadn't touched. She turned it off, sat on the bathroom floor, stared at the pipes. This was the part nobody warned you about. Not the big fears, losing the kids, running out of money, the town that didn't want you. Those you could see coming. You could brace for them. It was the small stuff that wore you thin. A pipe that leaked, a step that cracked, a faucet that spit brown water every 3rd time you turned it on. Each one alone was nothing. Together they were a voice that said, "You are not enough for this." And the voice got louder every time something else broke. She heard the front door open. No knock. Just the scrape of hinges and the thump of boots. Dorrit appeared in the bathroom doorway, holding a pipe wrench in one hand and a paper bag in the other. She looked at the disassembled sink, at Maren on the floor, at the puddle of water spreading across the tile. "You cross-threaded the coupling." "I know. And you used the wrong size wrench." "I know that too." Dorrit set the paper bag on the edge of the tub. Inside were two replacement couplings, a roll of Teflon tape and a block of cheddar cheese. She didn't explain the cheese. She got on her knees slowly with the kind of controlled pain that means arthritis and started taking apart what Maren had put together. "Hand me the tape." Maren handed it to her. "Now watch. You wrap it clockwise. If you wrap it the other way, it bunches when you tighten, and you get exactly the mess you made." Dorrit worked the way she talked, direct, fast, with no wasted motion. In 4 minutes, the sink was reassembled. She turned the water on. It ran clear and quiet. "The cheese is for the children," she said, standing. "It was on sale. Don't read into it." She came back the next day, and the day after that. She never announced herself, never called ahead. Just showed up when something needed doing, which in a house that old was every day. She showed Maren how to relight the pilot on the water heater, how to adjust the damper in the chimney so it didn't stick, how to tell which floorboards were rotten by the sound they made when you tapped them with the handle of a screwdriver. She didn't talk about Edmund. Maren tried twice. Both times Dorrit redirected so smoothly, it took a full minute to realize the subject had changed. The first time Maren asked how Edmund had died, Dorrit said the chimney cap needed replacing before nesting season, or they'd have starlings in the flue by June. The second time, Maren asked about the 3 patients. Dorrit said the grout in the upstairs bathroom was original, and if Maren didn't reseal it, the subfloor would rot through by winter. So Maren stopped asking. She watched instead. Watched the way Dorrit touched the banister when she went upstairs, not holding it. Just letting her fingers trail along the wood. The way you touch something that belongs to a memory you're not ready to discuss. Watch the way she paused every time she passed the study door, glancing in without entering, like someone visiting a room where a conversation had ended a long time ago and never been picked back up. Nola watched her too, and on the 4th day Dorrit came over. Nola drew her, not on the wall this time, on a piece of cardboard she had found in the shed. Dorrit in profile standing at the sink, wrench in hand, mouth set in the line. Maren had come to recognize as concentration. The likeness was startling. Dorrit looked at it for 5 seconds, then folded it in half and put it in her jacket pocket without a word. When she left that afternoon, Maren noticed she walked slower than usual. 2 weeks in small things started appearing. A bag of potatoes on the porch one morning. No note. 3 days later, a cardboard box containing a used but clean set of bed sheets, twin size, folded neatly. A jar of nails, the good kind, galvanized ring shank left on the front step with a rubber band around it. None of it had a name attached. None of it came with a knock on the door. Maren mentioned it to Dorrit. Someone's leaving things. People do that. Do you know who? Might be Carl at the hardware store. He overorders nails every spring and can't return them. Might be the Lindgren boy his mother makes him clean out the shed every April, and he'd rather give things away than throw them out. Might be anyone. She tightened a hinge on the pantry door. Not everyone in this town is what they sound like at the diner. On a Saturday, Maren walked to the hardware store to buy caulk. Carl, mid-60s, denim apron, hands the color and texture of old leather, rang her up without the usual silence. As she was leaving, he said, "The Velde place has original double-hung windows, doesn't it?" She turned. "Some of them. Don't replace them. They're better than anything you can buy now. Just need new sash cords." He reached under the counter and put a spool of cotton cord next to the register. "On the house, I overordered." She looked at the spool. It was brand new. The price sticker was still on it, $18.99. Thank you. He nodded once and went back to stacking paint cans as if nothing had happened. It was small. All of it was small. A spool of cord, a bag of potatoes, a box of sheets. None of it changed the fundamental math. The money was still running out. The house was still falling apart. The town still whispered. But each small thing was a crack in the wall between her and Harlow. And cracks, once they start, tend to run. Huck made a friend. The Lindgren boy, 11, freckled, missing a front tooth. He was too old to be missing, came by on his bike one afternoon. Because he'd heard there was a kid at the Velde House, and kids in Harlow were rare enough to be worth investigating. They threw rocks at the lake for an hour. When the boy left, Huck said his name was Owen, and that Owen had a dog named President, and that President had 3 legs but could still run faster than Owen, which Huck respected. Nola did not make a friend. Nola drew. The upstairs hallway wall had become her canvas. The lake scene had expanded to include the birch trees. The sky, the distant shape of the town below the hill. She was using the colored pencil she'd found in the closet, pressing hard, layering colors, the way she'd seen no one teach her. Maren stood in the hallway sometimes in the evening and just looked at it. The drawing was the only part of the house that was getting more beautiful every day, instead of revealing another problem. One morning she found Nola in the basement. The basement was the one part of the house Maren hadn't tackled yet. Stone walls, dirt floor in some sections, concrete in others. A water heater that groaned. A furnace that looked like it had been built during an era when furnaces were also used to frighten children. Along one wall, a row of metal shelving units held boxes of old medical journals, tax records, and the kind of accumulated clutter that a man generates over 40 years of living in the same house. Nola was drawing on the wall behind the shelving, on her knees, reaching between the metal uprights, working with the brown crayon stub. Nola, not down here. The girl didn't stop. She was drawing a rectangle. Precise edges. A horizontal line across the middle, a handle or a hinge, a door. Nola, come upstairs. Nola stopped. She looked at Maren. Then she pointed at the wall behind her drawing. Maren crouched down and looked through the gap between the shelves. The concrete wall behind them was consistent everywhere, gray solid old except for one section, about 3 feet wide and 6 feet tall. The surface there was slightly different in color, smoother, the kind of patch job you'd notice only if you were on your knees with a crayon the way an 8-year-old might be. She pulled the shelving unit away from the wall. It took 20 minutes emptying the boxes, sliding the metal frame across the concrete. Behind it, the patch was obvious, newer concrete over an older opening. And in the center, half hidden by decades of dust, the outline of a steel door frame. Maren ran her hand along the edge. There was a seam, and in the seam a keyhole. She tried the handle. Locked, solid. The kind of locked that means someone wanted it to stay that way. She sent the children upstairs, made dinner, read Huck a story about a bear who kept losing his hat, waited until both of them were asleep. Then she went back down. The basement at night was a different animal. The single bulb near the stairs didn't reach the far wall, so she brought the flashlight and a crowbar she had found in the shed that first week and never had a reason to use until now. She wedged it into the seam around the door and pulled. The metal didn't give. She repositioned, leaned her whole weight into it. Nothing. The door had been sealed by someone who understood that crowbars exist and had planned accordingly. She was standing there, breathing hard, flashlight in one hand and a crowbar in the other, when a floorboard creaked above her head. Not the settling kind, the stepping kind. She killed the flashlight, listened. The footsteps moved from the front door to the hallway, slow, deliberate. Then they stopped at the top of the basement stairs. I saw the light from my kitchen window. Dorrit's voice came down through the dark, dry as chalk. You're going to wake those children, and you're going to break that crowbar before you break that door. She came down the stairs one at a time, holding the railing. She reached into the pocket of her flannel jacket and took out a key. brass, old, worn smooth on the handle from years of being held but never used. I've been waiting 20 years for someone stupid enough to move into this house. She handed the key to Maren. Congratulations, you found it faster than I thought you would. Open it. The lock turned with more resistance than Maren expected, like the mechanism itself had opinions about being disturbed. The door swung inward. Cold air came out, basement cold, the kind that lives underground and doesn't know about seasons. Maren held up her flashlight. The room was maybe 15 by 20 feet. Concrete walls, concrete floor, a low ceiling with exposed pipes. Against the far wall, a metal examination table with a paper roll dispenser still attached. A glass front cabinet filled with bottles, amber blue, clear their labels, yellowed and curling. A small desk with a gooseneck lamp. A filing cabinet, 4 drawers, olive green. And along the left wall, a row of folding chairs, 6 of them lined up the way they'd be in a waiting room. It was a clinic, a full functional hidden clinic built into the basement of a house on a hill in a town of 900 people in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Dorrit stood in the doorway. She didn't go in. She stood at the threshold the way you stand at the edge of a place that holds something you've been protecting so long it's become part of your body. He built it in 1971, she said, 3 months after the lumber mill hired its first crew from Guatemala. 12 men, no papers, no insurance, no doctor within 100 miles willing to see them. She paused. Edmund was willing. Nobody knew. I knew. His wife knew. She died in 84. After that, just me and the patients. But they weren't in a position to talk. Maren walked to the filing cabinet, pulled open the top drawer. Manila folders, dozens of them, each one labeled with a first name only. No last names, no addresses, just Maria, Carlos, Elena, Tomas, Ana, Jorge. How many? Dorrit was quiet for a moment. Over 30 years, hundreds, maybe more. He didn't always keep records. Some of them came once, a broken arm, a fever, a birth. Some came for years. He delivered 11 babies in this room. I assisted on 9 of them. And the 3 patients who died. 2 of them died of things that would have killed them in a hospital with 10 doctors and a helicopter on the roof. The third was a girl, 19, who'd been sick for longer than anyone knew. He couldn't save her. He sat in the kitchen afterward for 3 hours without speaking. Dorrit's voice didn't waver, but it thinned the way a wire thins before it snaps. That was 97. After that, someone talked. Not one of the patients, someone at the hospital who'd noticed Edmund ordering supplies. The rumors started. He never defended himself. He said the people he'd helped couldn't afford to have their names connected to his, so he'd rather be called a killer than a hero. Maren opened the second drawer. More files, a ledger book with columns of dates and treatments written in handwriting. She now recognized from the utility bills upstairs, small, precise, slightly left-leaning. In the third drawer, under a stack of supply invoices, she found an envelope. Sealed, unaddressed, on the front in the same handwriting, for whoever comes next. She looked at Dorrit. I never opened it, the old woman said. It wasn't mine to open. Maren slid her thumb under the flap. Inside was a single sheet of paper typed with a handwritten signature at the bottom. She read it standing in the cold room, with the flashlight balanced on the desk, and Dorrit in the doorway, and the children asleep 2 floors above, unaware of any of it. The letter was dated March 2003, 7 months before Edmund died. It was written to the Beckford law firm in Marquette. It said, I have established a trust in the amount of $217,000 held in account, number 4401-7738, at First Northern Credit Union. These funds represent 30 years of personal savings and are designated for the conversion of my residence at 414 Lakeshore Road into a group home for children in need of placement to be operated as a non-profit under the name Velde House. I have made provisions in my will to transfer the property upon my death. My nephew Gage has contested this arrangement and will likely continue to do so. He is not to be granted access to the funds or the property under any circumstance. If no suitable operator is found within my lifetime, the trust is to remain active and the property maintained until one is. I don't know who will read this. I only know that this house was built to take care of people, and I refuse to let it stop. The signature at the bottom was steady and clean. Edmund A. Velde, M.D. Maren, read it twice. The second time her hands were not steady. $217,000, she said, plus 22 years of interest. And he left it for someone to turn this house into a home. Yes. Dorrit's voice was flat, the kind of flat that comes from pressing an emotion down so hard for so long it loses its shape. And in 22 years, no one came. The town was too afraid of the house. The county didn't care enough to look. The lawyers paid the electric bill and waited. She looked at Maren. And then you showed up in a Dodge Caravan with 2 foster children and $300, and you paid $1,500 for a house that was already yours if you'd known where to look. Maren folded the letter and put it in her back pocket. Her mouth was dry. The room felt smaller than it had a minute ago. Or maybe she felt larger the way you feel when something you didn't ask for lands on you. And you realize it's not going to leave. The car pulled up on a Wednesday, not a Harlow car. Harlow cars had rust and dents and bumper stickers from places that weren't Harlow. This one was a silver Lexus SUV, clean in a way that meant it had been washed that morning with a dealer frame from a lot downstate, and tires that had never touched a gravel road until today. The man who got out was tall, mid-50s, wearing a jacket that cost more than Maren's van. His shoes were leather polished, the kind of shoes that belong in a building with an elevator. He stood in the driveway and looked at the house the way a butcher looks at a side of beef, measuring, calculating, already dividing it into parts. He walked to the front porch without being invited. Maren was on her knees replacing a board, and she saw his shoes first. New soles, no wear. Hands smooth, no calluses, no cuts. Fingernails trimmed with the kind of precision that suggests someone else does it for you. Beautiful property, he said. Even in this condition, what would you take for it? Maren stood up, sawdust on her jeans, a nail between her teeth. It's not for sale. Everything's for sale at the right number. He smiled the way people smile when they already know the answer and are waiting for you to catch up. I'm Gage Pellerin. Edmund Velde was my uncle. He extended a hand. Maren took the nail out of her mouth but didn't shake. I'm sorry for your loss. It was 22 years ago. I've recovered. The smile stayed. I'd like to discuss the property. I'm sure you understand it has sentimental value. Family home, family legacy. I'd like to see it preserved properly. I'm preserving it. He looked at the porch. She was rebuilding the mismatched boards, the nails driven at slightly wrong angles. The bucket of primer sitting in the corner. His expression didn't change, but something behind it did. The way a screen goes dark before it shows a different picture. I mean professionally, restored. The way Edmund would have wanted. I don't know what Edmund wanted. That was a lie. The letter was in her back pocket. But Maren had spent enough years as a nurse to know when someone was presenting symptoms, and everything about this man, from his shoes to his smile to the question he'd opened with, was a symptom of something she didn't want in her house. I'm not selling. Thank you for stopping by. Gage looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked past her through the open front door into the hallway where Huck's sleeping bag was still rolled up in the corner, and Nola's pencils were scattered on the floor. You've got children living here. I do. In a house with no functioning heat-exposed wiring and the structural inspection from. He pulled a piece of paper from his jacket. Never. There's never been an inspection. I'll get one. I'm sure you will. He put the paper back. It's just that these things tend to raise questions with the county, with protective services, you understand. Maren's hands went still. Not because she was scared of him, because she understood what he'd just done. He'd walked onto her porch, asked a price being refused, and in the space of 30 seconds had shifted from buyer to threat. And the threat wasn't to her. It was to the children she'd spent 4 months keeping safe in a minivan and a falling down house and the narrow space between disaster and doing the best she could. Get off my porch. He raised both hands, the gesture of a man who wants witnesses to see how reasonable he's being. I'm just expressing concern. As a family member, as a citizen. He stepped down to the driveway. I'll be in touch, Miss Calloway. He knew her name. She hadn't given it. The Lexus pulled away slow, the way a car moves when the driver wants you to watch it leave. Maren stood on the porch until it rounded the bend, and the sound of the engine faded into the trees. Her hands were shaking, not the fine tremor of cold or hunger, the deep shake that starts in the chest and moves outward, the kind that comes when your body understands something your mind hasn't finished processing. She sat on the step, the one she'd cracked worse with the hammer, the one she still hadn't fixed, and pressed her palms flat against the wood and breathed. Huck came to the door. Who was that man? Nobody. He had really clean shoes. I noticed. People with clean shoes usually want something. Inside, Nola was standing at the window where the man had parked. She wasn't drawing. She was looking at the empty driveway with an expression Maren recognized because she'd seen it in the mirror at the apartment in Flint when the landlord came for the last time. The expression of someone who knows a door is about to close and is deciding whether to stand in front of it or step aside. Maren went inside, knelt in front of her, put both hands on the girl's shoulders. Nobody's going to take you anywhere, do you hear me? Nola's eyes were dry. She nodded once. Then she picked up her pencil and went back to the hallway wall. She didn't draw the lake this time. She drew a line, a single horizontal line across the bottom of the mural, thick and dark like a border, like a floor, like the line between something that could be taken away and something that was fixed to the ground. That night, Maren couldn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table with the letter in front of her and the utility bills next to it and a pad of paper where she'd been trying to make the numbers work. The trust fund existed. Dorrit had confirmed it. The letter confirmed it. The lawyers had confirmed it by paying the electric bill for 22 years. But accessing it meant paperwork, legal proceedings proof that she was a suitable operator for a group home. It meant inspections. It meant scrutiny. And scrutiny, she now understood, was exactly what Gage Pellerin intended to weaponize. She'd looked him up on her phone. Gage Pellerin, licensed real estate broker, Traverse City. A website with professional headshots and testimonials. A specialty in distressed property acquisition. Which she'd learned after reading 4 pages was a polite way of saying he bought places people had given up on and sold them to developers for 3 times the price. The Velde House on a hill above Lake Superior, with 12 rooms and lakefront access, was worth more torn down and rebuilt as vacation condos than it would ever be worth as a group home for foster kids. She understood his math. She also understood that his math didn't include the clinic in the basement, or the 30 years of names in a filing cabinet, or the face of a man Nola had drawn on a wall without ever seeing a photograph. The wind picked up outside. The windows rattled in their frames, the old sash cords she hadn't replaced yet. Somewhere in the basement, a pipe ticked as the water cooled. At 11:15, she heard a car, not on the road, in her driveway. Headlights swept across the kitchen ceiling and stopped. An engine idled for 10 seconds, then turned off. Maren went to the window. The silver Lexus was parked at the end of the driveway, just inside the property line. The driver's side window was down. Gage Pellerin sat inside, not moving, looking at the house. Just looking. The way you look at something you've already decided to take and are now simply choosing the method. He sat there for 3 minutes. Then the window went up, the engine started, and the car backed out and disappeared down Lakeshore Road. Maren stood at the window for a long time after the taillights were gone. The house was quiet. The children were asleep. The lake was invisible in the dark. She picked up her phone, dialed the number on the letter Beckford and Associates Marquette. It went to voicemail. She waited for the tone. "My name is Maren Calloway. I bought the Velde House. I found the letter. I found the clinic. I found the trust." A pause. Her voice was steady, but there was a thinness to it, the same thinness Dorrit's voice had when she talked about the girl who died in '97. "I need help. Edmund's nephew is here, and I think he's going to try to take the children from me to get me out of this house. I don't have a lawyer. I don't have money for a lawyer. I have a key and a letter and 2 kids sleeping upstairs who don't have anywhere else to go." She hung up, put the phone on the table, looked at the letter one more time. "I don't know who will read this." "Me?" she said to the empty kitchen. "I read it. Now what?" The refrigerator answered with its hum. Outside, the wind moved through the birch trees, and the lake shifted in the dark. And the house on the hill held its silence, the way it had held everything else patiently, stubbornly, with the lights on. And nobody home for 22 years, waiting for someone to walk through the door and finish what the man who built the clinic had started. A sound came from upstairs, not a cough, not a cry, just the small shift of a child turning over on a mattress. The kind of sound you only hear when the rest of the world has gone quiet. Maren went up, checked on her. The girl was asleep, one hand curled around her pencil, the other resting on the wall next to the thick dark line she'd drawn at the base of the mural. Maren put a blanket over her and stood in the hallway looking at the mural. The lake, the trees, the face of a man she'd never met. The line at the bottom that looked like a foundation, and below all of it barely visible in the dim light from the stairwell, the faintest outline of something new. Nola had started another drawing down low near the baseboard. Just the beginning, a few light strokes, the curve of a roof, the suggestion of a porch. It was the Velde House. Drawn from the outside. Drawn the way it would look if someone was standing at the bottom of the hill looking up. Drawn with the lights on. The lawyer called back at 7 in the morning. Maren was already awake. She hadn't really slept, just drifted in and out of a state that looked like sleep from the outside, but felt like standing guard from the inside. The phone buzzed on the kitchen table next to the letter, and the pad of numbers and a cup of coffee that had gone cold 2 hours ago. "This is Ruth Beckford. You called my office last night about the Velde property." The voice was older than Maren expected. Older and tired, and carrying the particular weight of someone who has been managing a dead man's hope for 2 decades. "I did. I've been waiting for that call since 2004. A pause. Not dramatic logistical, the kind of pause a person takes when they're pulling a file from a drawer. "I need you to listen carefully. The trust is real. The funds are real. And you are exactly who Edmunds will describe as a person of demonstrated need, who occupies the property with the intention of serving children. The legal framework is already built. Edmund made sure of that before he died. What he couldn't build was a wall around it, meaning Gage. Meaning Gage, he contested the will in 2005. Lost. Filed again in 2009 with a different argument. Lost. He's not stupid, Miss Calloway, he's patient. And patient people don't need to win in court. They just need to make the process expensive enough and slow enough that the other side quits. I'm not quitting. He doesn't need you to quit. He needs the county to decide you're unfit. If Protective Services gets a complaint, even an anonymous one, they're required to investigate. And if they walk into that house and find 2 foster children living without a certificate of occupancy, without a completed safety inspection, without proper heating certification, they won't care about Edmund's letter, or his clinic, or 30 years of delivering babies in a basement. They'll remove those children the same afternoon. Maren's grip tightened on the phone. She looked up the stairs. Huck's sleeping bag was visible through the railing. One sock-covered foot stuck out the end. "How long do I have?" If Gage files the complaint today, the county has 72 hours to respond. Probably less given that he knows people. You need that inspection done before they show up. You need the heating certified. You need the wiring checked. And you need it on paper, signed, stamped. I don't have money for that. You have a trust fund with 22 years of compound interest sitting in a credit union in Marquette. I can release emergency funds for habitability compliance. Edmund built that provision in specifically. I'll have a check ready by noon, but the work has to be done by a licensed inspector, and it has to be done fast. Maren hung up, sat at the table. The coffee was still cold. The house was still quiet. The math hadn't changed, but the clock had. 72 hours. 3 days. 3 days to turn a building that had been empty for 2 decades into a place the county would sign off on as safe for children. She called Dorrit. I need help. I gathered. I saw the Lexus in your driveway at 11 last night. I don't sleep much. A beat. I'll be over in 20 minutes. Put coffee on. Real coffee, not that instant powder you've been drinking. Dorrit arrived in 19 minutes carrying a box Maren hadn't seen before. Not the toolbox. A cardboard box, old soft at the corners, held shut with packing tape that had gone yellow and brittle. She set it on the kitchen table, pushed the cold coffee aside, and sat down. Before we talk about inspectors and wiring and everything else, you need to see this. She opened the box. Inside were photographs. Not framed, not organized, just stacked dozens of them, some black and white, some color that had faded toward orange. Dorrit laid them out on the table one at a time, the way a card dealer lays out a hand. A man in a white coat standing in the basement clinic, stethoscope around his neck, examining a woman who was visibly pregnant. The woman was smiling. The man was not. His face had the focused absence of expression that doctors wear when they're listening to something only they can hear. A row of children sitting in the folding chairs Maren had seen in the clinic. 5 of them. Brown-skinned, dark-haired, ranging from maybe 3 to 10 years old. One was holding a lollipop. Another was asleep against the wall. A younger woman, dark hair, pulled back, white uniform, hands in latex gloves, assisting the man with something Maren couldn't see clearly. The woman was Dorrit, 30 years younger, 40 pounds lighter, but the same set to the jaw, the same efficiency in the posture. I took these, Dorrit said. Over the years, he told me not to. He said photographs were evidence and evidence was danger. But I couldn't. She stopped, pressed her lips together, started again. I couldn't let all of it disappear. Someone had to remember that it happened, that those people existed, that he existed doing this for 30 years and nobody knew, and nobody thanked him, and nobody stood up when they called him a murderer, because standing up would have meant explaining why they knew he wasn't one. She put the last photograph on the table. It was different from the others, not the clinic. The front porch of the Velde House, some of the yard green and full. Edmund sat on the steps in his brown sweater, the one Dorrit had mentioned, September to April, and next to him sat a girl maybe 4 years old leaning against his arm. Behind them, the front door was open. Who's the girl? One of the babies he delivered, 1988. The mother had complications. Edmund drove her to the hospital in Marquette in his own car at 3 in the morning. Told the ER she was his patient, paid the bill himself. Drove her home the next day with the baby in a car seat he had bought at the Goodwill on the way there. Dorrit touched the edge of the photograph. The mother brought the girl back every summer to visit. She called him abuelo. He never corrected her. Maren looked at the photograph spread across the table. Hundreds of patients, thousands of hours. A career that existed entirely in a basement, entirely in secret, entirely without recognition. And on the other side, a nephew with a Lexus and a real estate license who wanted to turn all of it into lakefront condominiums. These are evidence, Maren said. They're more than that. Dorrit stood up. They're the reason this house exists. They're the reason Edmund left the money. And they're the reason that man in the clean shoes isn't going to win this. Not while I'm still vertical. The next 48 hours moved in a blur that Maren would later remember only in fragments. Carl from the hardware store came first. He pulled up in a truck that sagged on one side and said he'd heard she needed wiring checked. He wasn't a licensed electrician, but he knew one his brother-in-law in Ishpeming retired, who still had his certification, and owed Carl a favor involving a borrowed snowblower and a long story nobody wanted to hear. The brother-in-law came the next morning, checked every outlet, every switch, every junction box, replaced 4 that were dangerous, and signed the form. The heating came next. The furnace was old but functional. Dorrit had been maintaining it for years, running it once a month through the winter to keep the pipes from freezing, paying for the gas out of her own pocket. A technician from the county drove up and certified it in 2 hours. He charged half his normal rate because he said he was slow that week. He wasn't slow. He'd heard the story from Carl, who'd heard it from Deborah at the post office, who'd heard it from Owen Lindgren, who'd heard it from Huck. Huck was the engine that none of them expected, and none of them could stop. He'd told Owen about the clinic on the day they found it. Not the details, not the letter. Just the broad strokes, the way a 6-year-old tells a story, which is to say, without filter and with maximum enthusiasm. There's a secret room in our basement where a doctor saved a bunch of people, and nobody knows but he's dead now, and my mom is going to fix it. Owen told his mother told Deborah. Deborah told everyone who came in for stamps. By the time Gage's complaint reached the county office, filed Wednesday morning by phone, anonymous in theory, but sourced from a Traverse City area code that matched his office number, the inspector assigned to the case already knew the story. Not from the complaint, from his wife who cut hair at the salon next to the post office. The inspector drove up on Thursday afternoon. He was 40, quiet, thorough. He walked every room with a clipboard and a flashlight. He checked the stairs. The 3rd step from the top had been replaced with a new board nailed at an angle solid. He checked the wiring, the heating, the plumbing, the windows. He looked at the basement clinic and didn't say anything for a full minute. Then he wrote his report. Maren stood on the porch while he sat in his car finishing the paperwork. When he came back, he handed her a signed certificate of occupancy. Your house passes, barely in some areas, but it passes. He looked at the porch where 2 new boards sat next to 3 old ones, none of them quite matching. Whoever did your electrical work is good. Whoever did your carpentry is learning. That's me. Keep learning. He got in his car. At the end of the driveway, he stopped, rolled down the window, and said, "For what it's worth, I grew up in a foster home too. The roof leaked for 3 years. It was still the best house I ever lived in." Gage came one more time, Saturday, late morning. The Lexus pulled up the way it always did, slow and clean. But this time the driveway wasn't empty. Carl's truck was parked near the shed. Owen's bike was on the lawn. A woman Maren had never spoken to, she'd later learn her name was Jean Sheeran. The diner was on a ladder, scraping loose paint from the east wall. The Lindgren boy's father was on the porch replacing the railing, and Dorrit was sitting in a folding chair near the front door, drinking coffee from a thermos, supervising the way a general supervises from a hilltop, by watching everything and saying very little. Gage got out of the car, stood at the gate, looked at the house, at the people, at the work being done. His expression didn't change. He stood there for maybe 10 seconds. Then he got back in the car, closed the door, and pulled away. He didn't come back. No email, no phone call, no second complaint. The way Dorrit had predicted, not because he changed his mind, but because the math had changed. A house with 1 woman in it is a target. A house with a town around it is a problem he couldn't bill enough hours to solve. The paperwork took 3 months. Ruth Beckford handled most of it from Marquette, driving up once a week with forms for Maren to sign, and updates she delivered in the same clipped, tired voice, like a woman paying off a debt 1 sentence at a time. The trust was released. The funds were designated. The non-profit was registered with the state. And on a morning in September, when the birch trees had started to turn and the lake had shifted from summer gray to autumn blue, A small sign was hung on the gate at 414 Lakeshore Road, Velde House. It said nothing else. No subtitle, no mission statement, no inspirational quote. Just the name painted in white on dark green wood by Carl, who donated the paint and charged only for the brush because he said brushes were personal and couldn't be shared. Maren stood on the lawn and looked at it. The house behind her was still imperfect. The paint was patchy where the volunteers hadn't finished the porch. Still sagged slightly on the left side, and the window in the back bedroom still didn't close all the way because the frame had warped in '87, and nobody, not Edmund, not Dorrit, not Maren, had figured out how to fix it. But the lights were on in every window. The chimney let out a thin line of smoke, and through the front door, which stood open, came the sound of Huck explaining to someone loudly with the conviction of a person who has never once doubted his own expertise that the lake's name was Gerald, and that Gerald was in a good mood today. Nola finished the mural on the same day. Maren didn't know she'd finished until that evening, when the volunteers had left and the house was quiet, and the smell of Jean's chili. She'd made a pot and left it on the stove without asking, mixed with the smell of fresh paint and old wood and the lake. Maren walked upstairs to check on the children and stopped at the end of the hallway. The wall was covered, floor to ceiling, corner to corner. The lake, the birch trees, the sky in three different lights. Morning gray, midday white, evening gold. The town of Harlow below the hill, small and square and particular. The porch of the Velde House. And in the center, larger than everything else, the front door open. Standing in the doorway, a figure not detailed enough to be a portrait but clear enough to be a man. A man in a brown sweater, one hand resting on the doorframe, looking out at whoever was coming up the hill. Maren stood there for a long time. She didn't count how long. Nola was behind her. Maren hadn't heard her come out of her room. The girl stood at the other end of the hallway, pencil in her hand, watching Maren look at what she'd made. Nola. Maren's voice was careful. Who is that in the doorway? Nola looked at the figure on the wall. Then she looked at Maren, and in a voice that was small and clear and unhurried, a voice that had been inside her for months, waiting for the right sentence to carry it out, she said, "The man who left the door open for us." 7 words. The first complete sentence she'd spoken since Maren had known her. Maren didn't cry. She wanted to. She felt the pressure behind her eyes and in her throat, the same pressure she'd felt the night Dean died, and the morning she'd driven away from the apartment in Flint, and the afternoon she'd stood in the kitchen holding 20 years of electric bills. But she didn't cry because Nola was watching, and Nola needed to see that speaking was a normal thing, an ordinary thing. A thing that could happen on a Tuesday evening in a hallway and not break anyone apart. "That's a good answer," Maren said. Nola almost smiled, almost. Then she turned and went back to her room, and Maren heard the quiet scratch of pencil on paper. Not on walls this time, just paper. And she stood in the hallway with the mural and the fading light, and the sound of Huck downstairs asking the chili if it wanted to hear about Gerald. And she let the house hold all of it the way it had been holding things for 50 years, quietly, stubbornly, with the lights on. Later, Maren sat on the front porch. The air had turned cold the way September air does in the Upper Peninsula, not gradually, not gently, but all at once, like someone opened a door to a different season. The lake was dark. The sky was clear. Stars showed above the birch trees in the kind of density you only see in places where nobody wastes electricity on street lights. Dorrit came out the front door carrying 2 mugs. She handed one to Maren. Coffee. Hot, not instant. She sat in the folding chair she'd claimed as her own, the same one she'd supervised from during the workdays, the one that now had a permanent dent in the seat cushion, shaped exactly like Dorrit Voss. They sat without talking for a while. The coffee steamed. The house behind them creaked once the sound of wood adjusting to the dropping temperature. And from inside came the muffled noise of Huck negotiating bedtime with no one in particular. Dorrit looked through the window at the mural visible from the porch in the hallway light. He would have hated that color. Which one? All of them. Silence. The lake moved in the dark. A bird called from somewhere in the birch trees, one note repeated, then nothing. Dorrit held her mug with both hands. He painted every wall in that house the same shade of white. Said color was a distraction. I told him he was a distraction. She took a sip. 41 years I worked for that man, and I never once told him he was right about anything. Seemed important at the time. Do you wish you had? Dorrit looked at the lake. The question sat between them unanswered, the way some questions are supposed to sit, not because the answer is unknown, but because saying it out loud would change its shape. I wish I'd opened that basement door the day he died, she said, instead of locking it and waiting for someone else to be brave enough. She set the mug on the porch railing. But I wasn't brave, I was loyal, and loyalty without courage is just a fancy word for standing still. Maren looked at her. Dorrit looked at the lake. Neither of them said anything else about it. From inside, Huck's voice carried through the open door. Nola, do you think Gerald gets cold at night? I think we should knit him a sweater, a really big one. And from somewhere deeper in the house, so quiet Maren almost missed it, came a sound she'd never heard inside these walls before. Nola laughed. It was brief, just a breath of air pushed out faster than usual, the kind of laugh that escapes before the person knows it's coming. But it moved through the hallway and out the front door and into the cold September night, and Maren heard it, and Dorrit heard it, and neither of them said a word about it because some things are better left unspoken so they can stay exactly as they are. The porch light hummed. The coffee cooled. The house stood on its hill above the lake, windows lit. Door open, holding what it had always been built to hold. Not secrets, not silence, not the memory of a man in a brown sweater who argued with the radio and never admitted he was wrong. Just people, coming in from the cold, finding a place that had been left open for them. Have you ever walked into a building? A house, a church, a room you'd never been in before, and known without anyone saying a word that it had been waiting for you? Tell us in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe, because the next one might be about a place you recognize.